The 2024 North Carolina Supreme Court election was, well, a nail-biter. Democratic incumbent Justice Allison Riggs faced a fierce challenge from Republican Jefferson Griffin. When the dust settled, Riggs clung to a narrow victory, winning by a mere 734 votes. The state held its breath, bracing for the inevitable legal challenges in such a close race. What followed was a controversial legal battle that would call into question the very foundation of North Carolina's electoral process and send shockwaves through the nation. The heart of the controversy lay not in accusations of voter fraud, but in the interpretation of election law and its impact on tens of thousands of ballots. Griffin's campaign, echoing a growing national trend, chose to challenge the legitimacy of specific categories of votes, throwing the outcome of the election into uncertainty and shaking public faith in the democratic process. Jefferson Griffin's legal team wasted no time in contesting the razor-thin election results. They launched a multi-pronged legal challenge, alleging irregularities in how nearly 65,000 ballots were cast and counted. Their claims centered around three specific groups of voters, raising questions about whether these votes were indeed legitimate or should be thrown out, potentially swinging the election in Griffin's favor. The first category involved approximately 60,000 voters whose registration information was flagged as incomplete. These voters, many of whom had cast ballots in previous elections without issue, were now ensnared in a bureaucratic net due to missing details like driver's license numbers or incomplete social security numbers. The Griffin campaign argued that these discrepancies rendered the registrations invalid, and therefore the associated votes should be discarded. In a 5-2 decision that fell along party lines, the North Carolina Supreme Court issued a ruling that sent shockwaves through the state. The Republican majority court upheld some of Griffin's challenges while rejecting others, creating a confusing patchwork of decisions that left many voters unsure of their rights and the integrity of the electoral process itself. In a partial victory for Griffin, the court ruled that military and overseas voters whose ballots were flagged for ID discrepancies would have to take additional steps to prove their identity. These voters, often serving their country far from home, were given a 30-day window to cure their ballots by providing additional documentation. Failure to do so would result in their votes being discarded. This decision sparked outrage, as it placed an undue burden on service members and expatriates who often face unique challenges in casting their ballots from abroad. The controversial ruling was met with fierce opposition from within the court itself. Two justices, Anita Earls and Richard Dietz, issued scathing dissents, arguing that the majority opinion undermined the fundamental right to vote and set a dangerous precedent for future elections. Their voices, though in the minority, highlighted the deep divisions within the court and the profound implications of the ruling for North Carolina's democracy. Justice Earls, a Democrat, focused her dissent on the unequal treatment of military and overseas voters. She argued that the court's decision created a two-tiered system of voting rights, where service members and expatriates faced greater hurdles to having their votes counted compared to their counterparts within North Carolina's borders. This disparity, she argued, was not only unfair but also legally unsound. Justice Dietz, a Republican, took a different approach, focusing on the court's decision to retroactively change election rules after the election had already taken place. He argued that this set a dangerous precedent, essentially allowing the court to rewrite the rules of the game after it had already been played. The North Carolina Supreme Court's decision ignited, well, a firestorm of controversy. Political parties, civil rights organizations, and ordinary citizens voiced their outrage, slamming the ruling as an assault on voting rights and a blatant attempt to disenfranchise specific groups of voters. The ruling, coming amidst a national backdrop of heightened concerns about election integrity and voter suppression, served as a stark reminder of the fragility of American democracy. The North Carolina Democratic Party condemned the ruling, labeling it a direct attack on our democracy and vowing to fight the decision in federal court. They argued that the court's interpretation of election law was deeply flawed and would have a chilling effect on voter participation, particularly among minority communities who already faced significant barriers to the ballot box. Civil rights groups, including the NAACP and the ACLU, echoed these concerns. they argued that the ruling disproportionately impacted voters of color, who were more likely to be flagged for registration discrepancies or face challenges when casting ballots from overseas. This disparity, they argued, was a clear violation of the Voting Rights Act and threatened to roll back decades of progress in securing equal access to the ballot box. Beyond the immediate legal challenges, the North Carolina Supreme Court's decision had a corrosive effect on public trust in the democratic process. The perception that the rules of the game could be changed after the election, and that certain groups of voters were being targeted for disenfranchisement, sowed seeds of doubt and cynicism among the electorate. This erosion of trust, experts warned, posed a grave threat to the long-term health of North Carolina's democracy. The court's decision, coming on the heels of years of partisan battles over voting rights, fueled a sense among many voters that the system was rigged against them. This feeling of disenfranchisement, regardless of whether it was based on evidence or perception, had the potential to depress voter turnout and lead to further polarization within the electorate. Moreover, the court's ruling raised questions about the impartiality of the judicial system itself. The fact that the decision fell along party lines, with the Republican majority siding with the Republican challenger, fueled accusations that the court was acting not as an impartial arbiter of justice, but as a partisan tool. The North Carolina Supreme Court's ruling in the Griffin v. Riggs case sent ripples far beyond the state's borders. Legal experts and election watchdogs warned that the decision could establish a dangerous precedent, emboldening similar challenges to election results in other states and further undermining confidence in the electoral process nationwide. The ruling, they argued, represented a dangerous escalation in the ongoing battle over voting rights in America. The court's decision to allow for the retroactive invalidation of ballots based on technicalities or minor discrepancies opened the door for similar challenges in future elections. Opponents of the ruling feared that this could become a new tactic for partisans to challenge close election results, particularly in states with partisan control of courts or election administration. Furthermore, the ruling's impact on military and overseas voters raised concerns about the disenfranchisement of other groups that often face unique challenges in exercising their right to vote. Advocates for voting rights worried that this could embolden efforts to suppress the vote among other marginalized communities such as college students, low-income voters, and people with disabilities. The North Carolina Supreme Court's ruling did not mark the end of the battle over the state's electoral process, but rather the beginning of a new chapter. The ruling sparked a flurry of legal challenges and legislative maneuvers as both sides dug in for a protracted fight over the future of voting rights in North Carolina. The outcome of these battles, many observers believed, would have far-reaching implications for the state and potentially the nation as a whole. On the legal front, the North Carolina Democratic Party made good on its promise to challenge the Supreme Court's ruling in federal court. They argued that the ruling violated the Federal Voting Rights Act and the U.S. Constitution, and they sought an injunction to block the state from implementing the court's order. The case was widely seen as a major test of voting rights law, and its outcome could have implications for election challenges across the country. Meanwhile, in the state legislature, Democrats introduced a bill aimed at safeguarding voting rights and preventing future attempts at voter suppression. The bill, known as the Voter Protection and Reliance Act, sought to enshrine in state law the principle that all ballots cast legally on Election Day should be counted. The battle over North Carolina's electoral system became a microcosm of the larger fight over voting rights in America. The state, once a beacon of progress in expanding access to the ballot box, found itself on the front lines of a national struggle to protect the fundamental right to vote. The outcome of this struggle, many believed, would have profound implications for the future of American democracy. As legal challenges and legislative battles played out in North Carolina, all eyes were on the state. The nation watched and waited to see whether the forces of voter suppression would prevail, or whether the fundamental principles of democracy would withstand the assault. The stakes had never been higher, and the outcome of this fight would have consequences for generations to come.